In addition, we did an analysis of the previous density bonus applications that not only were submitted, but have been approved by the city to provide consistency of what kind of applications we're seeing. And then a huge portion of our recommendations is really based as a result of the displacement study that was completed in 2021. And that displacement study did in fact look at very specific target populations, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So in terms of the special needs and targeting special needs, we really broke up our presentation in 3 different categories. And the first category are things that we can do as a city to really help facilitate affordable housing for special needs populations. And the first bucket that we heard very clearly from council and what other cities have done, and also from the commission, is senior housing. The displacement study did reflect there was a sizable increase, approximately a 91% increase in the cost burden that seniors have to leverage. And that increase happened over a 9-year period, which is pretty substantial. And so this is one of the senior housing is one of the categories in current state density bonus law that does not specifically tie to the creation of affordable housing. Any senior housing project, whether it's market rate or affordable, as long as they meet the definition of a senior project, would be eligible for a density bonus increase of 20%. While we did look at this and we did consider possible incentives that could help the city create more housing, we did realize that in our review that additional incentives don't necessarily translate to additional housing units targeting affordable for seniors. And so we are recommending to maintain the existing state density allocation of 20% for senior projects. Part of this is also reflective of how we've seen our own development applications over the last several years. To date, we only have 1 senior market rate project that has been entitled in the last 5 years. That is Mission Seniors Project off of Mission Boulevard. That project has not started construction and is currently looking for other funding options to be able to make it viable. There are 2 other 100% affordable housing projects that are under construction or getting nearing to filing building permits. And those are the Pimento Place project in downtown Hayward, and the other one is the Mission Paradise project that is located south on Mission. So with that, we are through the history of meeting that special needs for seniors. There's not a lot of projects that we're seeing moving forward, and only of the 3 that have come forward recently, the market rate did not take advantage of the density bonus. The 2 affordables did take advantage of that, and it is because they are allowed per 100% density, 100% affordable. They are allowed additional incentives and concessions. The second special needs population that we want to target is unique to Hayward because, as you know, we have a couple of great campuses here that support quite a few number of students. In fact, as per the displacement study, there's about 35% of California East Bay students are considered as low income. And so the existing incentive as defined by the state allows for a 35% increase of density bonus, including 1 concession or incentive that would help reduce the cost of the student housing. But there are caveats to that. In order for that housing of market rate to apply, they would need to dedicate a percentage of their units specifically for low income students. And there's other eligibility criteria, that thresholds that have to be satisfied, including there is a Cal Grant financial aid program that would determine a student's eligibility to even meet this. One of the incentives that we thought about, since we currently don't have a program, is we could further incentivize the creation of student housing by potentially increasing the density bonus, which is currently 35%. We could increase it to 50%. And we could also afford those developers the opportunity to have 1 additional concession or incentive, if that is something that the task force would recommend. Currently, there is no specific trade-off. In other words, there's no negative or no negative impact towards supporting new incentives. This would be relatively a new opportunity for housing creation in Hayward. The next topic is really dealing with something that we heard quite frequently, which is creating housing for all. And when we're talking about universal design, what we're really saying is that when a house or a dwelling unit is created, it's creating a space and it's being designed in such a way that meets the needs of all people without requiring adaptation. We find this with many of our older housing stock, where maybe some of the door jambs or the width of the doorways will not accommodate, and so opportunities to look at creating universal design uniformly across the board for all projects could be something that the city could explore. Currently, we have no incentives that encourage or that allow for density bonus incorporation into projects. But one of the incentives that we could consider would be a marginal increase, and that would be to maximize the density bonus or to create one additional concession or incentive for projects that incorporate universal design features. I would say, though, that when we looked at this, it is a trade-off. Providing a density bonus, although it may generate more units on site, there's no guarantee that the developer will provide those units as affordable housing to meet the Affordable Housing Ordinance. And so there's no guarantee. It is possible that they would pay an in lieu fee, they could fee out, and there would be no guarantee that those units could be set aside for affordable. So that's something that we would look for feedback on specifically tonight related to that trade-off. The other thing that we looked at and explored was something that really came out of the displacement study. And this was a very clear indication that the city of Hayward has a deficit when it comes to larger family style housing units. And what we found is that there was a 90% increase of overcrowded units between 2010 and 2019. And this is really because there could be several factors. Some of it could be the cost of rent or the cost to purchase a unit, if it happens to be a condo or a house. The other thing that we've noticed, though, is that there are multi-generational families that are living together in sometimes very crowded and overcrowded situations. And so one of the things that we looked at exploring would be an option to incentivize the creation of these larger unit types. Currently, there is no incentive. And when an applicant comes forward and is compliant with the Affordable Housing Ordinance, we do require that the affordable housing units, if they're being provided, need to be in comparable size. We've heard from many developers that that is providing a additional financial burden. And so one of the things that the city could explore would be looking at when a market rate project, a rental project, is proposing to designate more than 50% of the units as 3 or more bedroom types. The city could look at and explore about reducing the square footage of the affordable units. So if a typical 3-bedroom unit would be 1,500 square feet, rather than requiring it be of comparable size, the city could identify a percentage of reduction, if they thought that would incentivize the creation of more 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom units. In addition, the city could also provide a 5% density bonus to the developer who decides to pursue this option, as well as we have the option to provide one additional incentive in concession. I would say that based on the housing analysis that was contained in the housing element and the analysis that we're currently doing for updating the housing element, we realized and determined that there's only approximately currently 20% of the rental units currently in the city contain 3 or more bedrooms, compared to 79% of ownership units housing that contain 3 or more bedrooms. So there's obviously a very disproportionate advantage for those that have ownership versus rental housing. If this option is supported, staff would need to evaluate the appropriate size differential and bring that back to ensure that the livability of those units would not impact, obviously, the viability of the units themselves versus providing affordable units, and will not create an impact to those living there. So that would be a potential option that we would need to do a little bit more exploring. The other category is we're shifting to actually creating more affordable housing development. And one of the options that we looked at is really looking at and incentivizing projects that incorporate ADUs. The state has taken recent legislative action to allow these outright. And while we have seen development provide these on a case-by-case basis, there's really no specific identified incentive that would encourage developers to do this proactively. It should be noted currently there is no specific incentive for the development of ADUs, except that the state has and the city has made many ADUs a ministerial approval, so it has streamlined the approval process. That being said, it should note that projects that include ADUs as part of a for sale development could receive a higher density bonus. And as we pointed out before, there's no necessarily commitment or requirement that the developer provide these affordable units on site. And so while it does not necessarily incentivize the creation of additional on-site affordable units, ADUs by their design tend to be more affordable and increase the overall number of housing units throughout the city. Another option that we looked at is creating incentives for mixed income projects. Currently, developers can receive a 50% density bonus if they set aside 15% of units for very low, 24% for low, or 44% for moderate. The city could, in order to incentivize the creation of these affordable units on site as part of a mixed income project, we could provide a higher density bonus. And we could also look at providing one additional incentive or concession. And just to clarify, when we're talking about incentives and concessions, we're talking about providing developers the option to reduce development costs. And requesting an incentive and a concession is one way to do that. Waivers, on the other hand, are really restricted to the amount of density that's provided for a project. So just for clarification, as we're looking at all of these, when we're talking about incentives or concessions, what we're really communicating is the option to reduce the financial burden. In this specific instance, what we had thought is that if we do pursue this option, the additional revenue that could be provided by increasing the density could help offset the cost of creating that affordable unit by having that additional incentive or concession. So again, to date, we haven't really seen any mixed income projects request a density bonus at the maximum, but this is an option that we could continue to explore. The next is moving on to increasing affordable housing ownership and or targeting deeper levels of affordability. Currently, when an applicant meets the Affordable Housing Ordinance, the developer is entitled to one incentive or one concession. The more affordable the housing or the deeper level of affordability they are committing, the greater number of benefits they receive. And so if they exceed the Affordable Housing Ordinance by creating a deeper level of affordability, they by right are entitled to or eligible for additional incentives or concessions per state density bonus laws. One of the things that we looked at is creating this proactively by allowing one additional incentive or concession specifically tied to projects that not only exceed the number of affordable housing units required by a project, but also make a commitment to provide that deeper level of affordability. There is a question, the incentive may encourage the developers to exceed the minimum requirements, but it also may discourage them at the same time from actually meeting the requirements by seeking a density bonus that will require 20%. And just for clarification for everyone on the meeting tonight, the state's density bonus law is based on a sliding scale. And so when we looked at creating these, there's a very kind of a fine line that we have to draw in trying to balance incentivizing housing production without disincentivizing someone for providing more affordable units on site. The other thing that we looked at, and the state is has provided a lot of flexibility for projects that are 100% affordable. For those that are 100% affordable, developers by right are entitled to up to 4 incentives or concessions, and they're entitled up to an 80% density bonus. And this is generally citywide, that is the allowance. If they happen to be located near a major transit stop, state law allows them unlimited density, and they can have up to 3 stories of additional building height near major transit corridor. One of the things that we could do to further contribute and allow and further incentivize the affordable housing production is to increase the number of concessions to 5. So actually providing one more additional incentive or concession, which again would help leverage the feasibility and create more opportunities for financing a project. Switching gears here, the other thing that we decided to look at are creating predefined incentives. We looked specifically at fee waivers, reductions, and deferrals. We currently have, as part of our Muni Code and our master fee schedule, we do have some fee waivers that have been adopted for the traffic impact fee program and the park impact fees. The city, these are things that are currently allowed, and but to the degree that we haven't really tried to promote those to a great degree, that we'd have the option to do that. And we could look at ways that we can help incentivize that portion of it. Currently, for projects that are market rate that do provide affordable units, they do get, for those affordable units, a 50% reduction in the amount of park fees. So there is a portion of a reduction that's already built into our existing ordinance, but it's about, here again, it's about really promoting that option. The other thing that we are exploring right now that we would like the feedback on from the task force is looking for a fee deferral specifically tied to utility connections. And utility connections are something that have a really high cost for a developer upfront. They're costs that they typically have to finance as part of the project. And we have on case by case, we have allowed some projects to defer some of those utility connections at a later date once the units come online or prior to certificate of occupancy. And so that may be an option. There are obviously some feasibility impacts that we probably need to explore a little bit further, and there would need to be some sort of guarantee or an agreement put in place to ensure that the city would get paid and be made whole. But that is an option if we wanted to help leverage the upfront costs for developers that do provide that on-site affordable housing. The other thing that we looked at, we've heard and we've received this feedback from several of our previous density bonus applicants, is a request to increase the building height. And what we were thinking in this case is that although the state allows by right of 100% affordable developers to obtain up to 3 stories of building height if they're located near a transit corridor, one of the things that we could explore would be allowing 1 additional story of building height for projects that provide those on-site, regardless of its rental or ownership. And in addition to being located near a major transit stop, we could expand that geographical area to also include projects along Mission Boulevard and in our downtown specific plan. And this really does align with some of the other policy changes that we've made in the past. When we updated the Mission Boulevard form-based code and the downtown specific plan, there was really an intent to really build out those areas that can accommodate housing in that urban environment. So allowing for a predefined incentive for 1 additional story of building height is something that we could further explore. The other thing that we heard from several of the developers is that the reduction of required commercial space in mixed-use projects is something that they would recommend that we explore. And primarily it's because the target populations that are identified in here, depending on which target populations that we're talking about, whether it's seniors or students, that when they're located in a mixed use zone, that oftentimes has created a barrier for them financially, because creating that commercial, financing that commercial has become an obstacle for them getting development. And so one of the things that we could look at is if this is something that is supported, we could look at this a little bit further. We could identify what would be an appropriate amount of reduction if it's being supported. And we can, and primarily we want to make sure that if we do allow that as a reduction, that we don't want to end up resulting in an unmarketable space that remains vacant. So that is something that we could look at. And that wraps up our presentation generally. What we're asking the task force to really consider are the questions really targeting on the screen. Does the task force agree with the additional incentives for certain types of housing as recommended by staff? Does the task force agree that the amount of density bonus increases for certain types of housing development as recommended by staff? And then the last one is, should the density bonus be used to meet the diverse housing needs, as we pointed out with the universal design, or do we want to look to create a density bonus ordinance that looks to maximize the number of on-site? And with that, we are planning, once we receive feedback from this task force, we will finalize the list of revisions. We are proposing to present our draft ordinance to the Planning Commission later this fall with recommendation of council shortly thereafter. And then as part of that process, one of the things that we're also looking at doing is creating a suite of informational handouts to developers and staff so that we not only know how to administer the updated density bonus program, but we're incentivizing and promoting the program that was recently adopted. So that would be part of it. I'm here to answer any questions. Christina Morales, our housing manager, is also available to answer any questions. And we have a couple of members of an external consultant team, Lorraine Weiss and Fahad, that can help us should we need to ask them. So with that, I'm available for questions, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Appreciate all of that work, and I suspect we probably will want the slides back, but we'll go first, since this is a work session, we'll go first to see if our one exceptional member of the public would like to make any comments. If so, please raise your hand. And if not, then I will turn it over to my colleagues to comment on the staff questions and or the individual proposals if you want to drill down to that detail. So who would like to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
If that's okay, yeah?
That is okay. Please
Okay.
do. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say, just tell staff, thank you for this. And, I've gotten a lot of great compliments from you about you, Jeremy, just so that you know, there's a lot of folks out there, they're talking about you out there in the street. And I just want to let you know that, I'm the guy that defends you. Okay. I'm the guy that defends you out there. So, but I also want to say that, I think it's interesting how staff brought, Director Clausen in here when, especially when we start talking about reducing fees. So, he's going to be browbeating us here on the call. So I just want to be aware of that.
Got to make sure everything's above board here.
So, let me see if I can, there's a lot here, and I know, I do have some questions and I do have some questions and some comments, but, and they're not in any particular order. So I'll just take a stab at it here. So, building height. I know, we've talked about this over the years, and if we need to get to where we need to get to, then building height, is, I don't mind, going up. One of the questions I had here too was, how many more lots are there in the city that potentially we can build? Are there, where else can we build in the city? I'm just, I don't see a whole, do you know that, Jeremy?
We have the housing element that we're currently developing has a lot of vacant properties. There's also, I'll just say, there's a lot of underutilized properties that are ripe. And we get inquiries all the time from developers that are looking and doing due diligence to find out what's possible. So there's quite a lot of interest still.
Okay. Well, when it comes to height increase, I don't mind increasing the height in the downtowns and near transit hubs and so forth. But I'm also not afraid to go high, and I'll just take a site right now, and that's the Kaiser site, right, on Hesperian and Tennyson. I mean, that's not necessarily near transit necessarily, but it's kind of, it's on the corner of two major roads, but it's sort of residential. But anyways, I can see something going up high there, I don't know what it's zoned for, but anyways, so I guess the point I want to make here is I'm not afraid to go high. The only thing that we would probably get is pushback from the neighborhood. I mean, neighborhoods are usually the ones that push back on height. And so, those are, a lot of times what I've seen about height issues has been based project to project, based on project to project. And, I know that there was a lot of discussion and a lot of going back and forth, specifically with the Lincoln Landing, but anyways, so height increases, I'm not afraid to go high if it gets to what our goal, gets to our goal. So there's that. Another point I want to make is, reducing commercial size in mixed use. Well, first of all, I am very supportive, strongly supportive of mixed use. That's, but, I'm afraid to let go. I'm afraid to reduce the commercial element or even commercial size, because I don't want this to turn into a slippery slope. I don't want us to set a standard here, and then when we get to a project, developers will come to us and then talk us out of a commercial space. And I'll give you an example, although they didn't do it last night, but last night is an example. The project we approved last night on Grove and Foothill, I'm happy that it's mixed use. I'm happy that there's ground level retail, but I also want to see retail. I want to see good quality retail in some of these mixed use developments. So so I will be very leery about reducing retail size in mixed use developments, and I'll be very strict in even considering those, because I don't want to lose our retail opportunities, quite frankly. And then I have here, I do like the mixed use affordable element, like in Foothill. And I know there's, the Foothill project that we approved last night, there were some strengths to that I think we could, use in other places. And I know that I think it was the CDEC, we heard of a potential project in downtown on Main and B Street, an affordable, I think it was going to be, I forget what the percentage was, but there was going to be an affordable element to it, a significant affordable element to it. And they actually asked us to have housing all the way ground level. And, I think I pushed back. I think the others pushed back on that too. But, I don't want, especially in downtown, I don't want a project coming to us and a developer saying that the commercial isn't going to pencil out. So let's see. Fee deferrals, people come to us about that all the time. And, this is where, Mr. Clausen, I mean, it's easy for us to say, sure, let's defer fees if it gets to our goal. But, I don't know if that is a project by project decision. Do we make that, or is it something that we can codify and, at a policy level? I mean, I don't know. In your thoughts on that?
You know, I think actually Jeremy and Christina can speak to it as well as I can. We've had some discussions about different fees and the potential for deferring them, essentially with a hook. So deferring the fee and saying, you know, you don't have to pay this early in along in the process, so help you to develop and do more. But you're not going to get a certificate of occupancy until you finish paying all the fees that are due. You're not going to get potentially like utilities, things like that. Doing that in a way that is still responsible, and the city will recover. It may defer it for a fiscal year, 2 fiscal years, something of the sort. But allowing for the development of the much needed housing and not letting the upfront cost be what prevents the start of the project.
Okay.
I think the only thing I have to add is that it's a very limited scope. So we're only looking at projects that include on-site affordable housing.
Yeah.
So it incentivizes the inclusion of those units, and it's only specific to the utility connection fee. So the other fees that we need to run day-to-day operations would not be impacted by it. So we're not looking at complete fee deferral. It's very limited scope of what we're looking at. And we would secure our interest by recording an agreement to the title of the property, and ensuring that if the property got sold, ownership transferred, that we'd be able to get the fees paid to us at the time of transfer.
So based from what I just heard, I mean, it sounds very detailed and very complex. So is that something we can, is that codifiable? Is that something we can actually do on a high level policy, on a policy level and accomplish?
I think also on an administrative level, I think it aligns with the recordation of our affordable housing agreement. So we can add it to an already existing process, so that it wouldn't have to be an additional step. It would just be an additional document added to the pile of documents Kelly will have to sign.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. I don't know, trying to think what I was trying to say here. So let me see if I can say this clearly. As you were talking about our density bonuses, I was also thinking about our height policies, and let me see if I'm asking this question clearly. Do our density bonuses match, or are they commensurate with our height policy? Does that make sense?
The density bonus right now, there's nothing in our current ordinance because it's outdated, but yeah. The density bonus allowances, when a developer is requesting that, depending on what, if they're looking to have a development waiver, one of the things that they could request is height. And those are things that have been requested, to waive the height to be able to accommodate those additional units. As I mentioned before, if it's 100% affordable, they're allowed by right 3 stories if they happen to be near transit. And it's actually a quarter mile of transit. So as the crow flies, it's a pretty large swath of area of corridor. And that would include both of our BART stations, the Amtrak station, and any other major bus stop that has pretty high level of headway times, frequency times. But to answer your question, we have seen projects that are coming in, and the purpose of the density bonus, when somebody's requesting a density bonus, the general plan limit that we have, and again, this assumes if we have a range of possible densities, the density bonus will allow them to go above that without any penalties. The state allows that action if they qualify for density bonus. And so conceivably, this would be one option to allow for additional units, would be to allow them additional space to be able to provide those units.
So I would support that. I think, as long as we're, if we need to update it, sounds like we do. So let's do it. And then, and like I said, I'm not afraid to go up, so to speak. But just to kind of loop back to what you just said, Jeremy, would this also include, let's say hypothetically, the hotel project that we're hoping that it gets started again, but I don't think it will. But, in front of that housing development on Mission Boulevard, let's say an affordable housing developer came there, would that be included in this?
If they took that project that was previously entitled for I think it was a hotel,
Like a hotel, yeah.
and then they decided to turn that over into affordable housing, they would, and because it's close to BART,
Yeah.
be eligible for an automatic 3-story increase, and they could put unlimited number of units within that same box. So that encourages more units. It doesn't necessarily encourage larger units, which is why we added that other piece of the recommendation. How do we incentivize larger units for families that need good rental housing?
Yeah. And, and I was also thinking, because you also mentioned something about decreasing the size of affordable elements. And I mean, I wouldn't mind, would that include like SROs and stuff, increasing the amount of SROs, or just generally reducing the size of the affordable unit?
I think it depends a bit on the project. I mean, when we see some projects that you're looking at, maybe a 2,500 square foot 3-bedroom unit, and you consider that that same unit might be livable at 200 square feet, we need to now analyze a little more what the impact is, because we also don't want all of our affordable units to be small by design. We don't want them to be micro units. We want them to be a place where a family could comfortably live, or a household. So we need to analyze that a little more, but it is some feedback that we got from developers, is that it's easier to do the affordable units if they don't have to be consistent in size. We want them to be consistent in bedroom size, but maybe potentially allow for a slight reduction in square footage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would, cautiously, I would support that, and I mean, for that reason, it totally makes sense. If we do that, then we just got to make sure we got good quality parks around town, so that people can go out and recreate, right? But okay, so those are just those are some of my specific questions, but just real quickly, I'm just going to go to the 3 questions. Does the task force agree with the additional incentives for certain types of housing? Yeah, and yes, I do. And I also, I think the incentives for student housing, specifically along the Mission Boulevard corridor, I think that could be, there could be something there. So anyways, yes, I do agree. Does the task force agree with the amount of density bonus increases for certain types? Well, I guess I just mentioned those, right? So I think I answered that. And then does task force prefer targeting special needs populations over incentivizing additional on-site? Yeah, that's yeah. I heard, yeah. That's a good question. I don't know if incentivizing additional on-site affordable, if that's more of a catch-all. I mean, is that more inclusive than really calibrating down on a particular population or not? I don't know, but so I'm going to reserve my answer to that question right now, and I'll let Councilmember Wahab talk. But I need a few more minutes to think about that one, and I'll come back. But thank you, appreciate it.
Fair enough. Councilmember Wahab.
Thank you. So I just want to highlight that I feel kind of weird because Miss Jennifer Ott is not here, and so she's always at our housing meetings, so it just feels a little empty without her. But I appreciate the presentation, Jeremy. So it's for me, it's a little
Jennifer is here in spirit, Councilmember.
Yes, yes. So it's just,
and she'll be back in August.
I don't feel like she's missed a meeting, so it's it's always interesting to see. But No, I appreciate the presentation. I'm hoping that when it comes to the full council that we have kind of a graph. So like just for absorbing what we're absorbing, because this is obviously a very heavy thing and we don't want to make a mistake on housing in particular. When we're saying, okay, let's say height level, right? Simple question, right? Where are we at? Where do we potentially recommend to be at? And then how far is maybe, pushing the envelope for us, right? So for example, on planning commission, when we're appointing planning commissioners, I ask them, what do you consider high density? And they immediately talk about height. And, that's not necessarily what we're looking at, but sure, we'll let them say that. And they say 3 stories, right? That was one of the responses of one of the commissioners. And I was shocked because 3 stories, probably seemed a lot, 50 years ago, but not necessarily today, right? Right now we're looking at 10 stories or more. So even potentially thinking about like, how high do we want to go and changing that in our residential areas, as well as, I'm going to say on Mission, in the downtown area and so forth, right? I think that we do need to just have kind of where are we targeting, right? Especially if this has changed from like last time this was changed was in 2005. I don't know how many years that was, but that was a long time ago, right? So we need to think, okay, if we're making rules today, it's going to go out 20 years, right? And just, understanding that, 3 stories does not make sense for 20 years from now. 5 stories probably doesn't make sense. Maybe it is 10 stories, right? So just putting it down like per question, how big a room should be. What is the average room today versus what do we, look like tomorrow in the average apartment size as well, right? So I will say a 920 square foot apartment, I think is decent. Anything below that, and I know there are apartments at like 700 square feet and so forth, I think it's personally too small, right? Depending on how many people live there. I will say that there was a question that was raised to me, and I think I may have asked our deputy city manager this years ago. Is there a limitation of how many people can be in a particular unit?
Are you asking how many people folks can reside in a single unit?
Yep.
So I don't know. Your finance director doesn't know.
I assume that when you answered, I was like, not for you, Dustin.
Yeah, I don't think that. I mean, I know some cities do put limits on people per household. I don't believe in Hayward we have a limit on the number of persons per household. I know other communities have done things like that, but Christina can correct me, or Jeremy, but I don't believe we have a limit per household.
It's not based on household. It's based on square footage of the property. And it's based on fire and building code. So the number of people that can legally live in a unit is actually very high. And it has to do with like a certain base number of square foot and then increments above, like, I think 75 square feet increments. So we've come across this, especially in the context of fair housing, is that you also have to be careful if you put any limits on the number of people that you are that the city is faced with looking at violating fair housing in terms of providing housing for larger households, larger families. So we have to be cognizant of that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's relevant because the reason why I say that is, as much as I support multifamily households being in one particular unit, at the same time, with increased density, with the focus on single family homes being rezoned and upzoned and so forth, that we also, my ultimate goal is to avoid creating a slum, right? They could be brand new buildings, but with the amount of people, with the tight spaces, it's public health hazard. It's a, from our water usage to our traffic to our just infrastructure as a whole, it does put a lot of pressure on our infrastructure. So I just want to see, what does that look like? I think I was told, we have, I think I was told that, for example, like more than 10 people can live in a 2-bedroom apartment, right? And, you're really thinking like, how does that influence the neighbors? How does that influence parking? How does that influence a lot of other things, right? Especially if people have multiple jobs or leaving and have trucks and so forth. So I do, and I've stated this multiple times in the past too, I do want to find a fine balance, because even when we're talking about the upzoning, if it's single family zones and SB9, the beauty of it is the fact that the homeowner has to live there for them to be able to do anything with their property, right? Whereas, we are trying to avoid developers just coming in, wiping down the flatlands and just building up and not caring about parking or, the neighbors or the community and things like that. So I just really want to keep that in mind as much as we are trying to develop, to make sure that there's a quality of life in each neighborhood that people like, whether it's parks or things like that. So the one thing I don't like about this is the fact that it's like we're giving up, we're conceding on a lot of different things. We're just saying, okay, here are the concessions and moving on. So I do want to find a very strict balance there. And I trust Ms. Morales for you to, put your 2 cents on that eventually. But, I think that one of the things I do want to touch back on is that, okay, so targeted special needs population. On a lot of studies nationwide, I think there was one out of Penn, maybe a year ago that said that, and I've said this probably before too, that our senior homeless population is expected to triple within a decade. And we are already seeing that. A lot of people that I talk to also highlight that. Fixed income is not going up. Disability is not going up. Social Security is not necessarily going up. Things like that. But housing has been going up nonstop, pretty much, right? Even in a recession, even in economic hardships. Rent has gone up significantly. Even now, it's been in the news that it's gone up throughout the Bay Area, but as well as the state and nation. So I do just think that we do need to prioritize seniors. However, we don't necessarily want to, the part that you say possible incentive, because it prioritizes market rate senior housing. That is not what we're looking for. We're looking for making sure that seniors on a fixed income, especially from our population, that median family income is about $85,000. As they retire, they're not potentially going to be making rent at market rate, and just making sure that we are able to prioritize affordable senior housing. Right. So that's incredibly important to me. And I do think that that is a population that I am very concerned with, because seniors who also own homes that are trying to look for something a little smaller, but stay within their network, whether it's their doctors, their family, their random network, they want to stay local, but they want to downsize. So I just want to make sure that we do have opportunities for them as well. So that is incredibly important to me. I will say student housing. I think we've talked about that a number of times. I just want to ask a little bit about the Caltrans parcel. That's still moving kind of towards student housing. Is that correct? It's been a while since we talked about that particular parcel.
Which parcel is that? Which
the one close to Cal State East Bay.
I am not sure that it is. I don't know if Sarah.
Is that the one right above the Subaru dealership?
I want to say yes.
There hasn't really been a proposal there yet formally. So Subaru is, as part of their deal to develop that bottom half of the parcel there to work with us on what that future uphill development looks like. But I know we had talked about either affordable housing or student housing on that parcel. So I think that's something that's still under consideration, but nothing that's been decided, and there's no actual proposal right now.
Okay. And if we have something consistent for them that's close to Cal State East Bay, not only are you guys stating here that Cal State East Bay is, 35% low income, but in particular, they're also extremely diverse. Cal State East Bay is one of the most diverse universities in the nation. And there's a lot of hardships. There's a significant amount of first generation students as well. So I do just want to, if we have a project that is, for the life of the entire project, for basically forever, student housing, and it's considered low income student housing with a partnership with Cal State East Bay, we can prioritize senior housing in other developments, right? So I just want to see, I think Ms. Morales, you've been pretty good about balancing kind of what our numbers look like. So like last night we spoke about, roughly, I think Monica said, 30% is, 27% is what she stated, but, roughly 30% affordable. So as long as we're keeping that in mind as we are moving, but student housing is important, especially around Cal State East Bay. Chabot is mostly still people living for the most part with their parents or adults kind of working part-time. So those two schools are the ones that are of interest, but I would still have to say seniors first and then students. And the reason for seniors is because their income capacity is far more limited than students, if you will. I did like the housing for all universal design. I think I want to say our chair has potentially talked about this in the past as well. So I do appreciate you guys bringing this up. And just with, aging parents, and you see this and ADA compliance and much more, it's become harder and harder. You as we are talking about seniors, we also have to talk about able-bodied individuals versus those that aren't as able. I think it's important. I don't exactly know what that's going to look like if it's one. Would this be potentially, a couple units in a property, or how does this particular piece look like?
We actually talked about creating a tiered system, but we could also require that, and requiring developers or incentivizing developers to provide, projects that incorporate universal design principles doesn't add a significant amount of expense to a development. And so, I think when Christina and I were talking about this earlier, we talked about, well, maybe there's a sliding scale that if there's if they provide, half of the units that incorporate universal design principles, then they would be eligible for an incremental increase in density bonus and or a concession. There's also the possibility that if the entire project is being built and constructed with universal design, that maybe they would get a slightly higher. But again, we would need to define what would constitute a universal design criteria. And so we would need to look at that a little bit further. But that was kind of the thought.
Yeah, and I'm kind of almost thinking like, even if it's a small percentage, right? You know how we have our on-site affordability, that, this is kind of what we expect. Because, I'm just going to say that it's a smaller percentage of the population that may also need this, right? And if we can kind of spread it out where we're not necessarily saying 100% on one particular development versus, just 5% everywhere, may make more sense, right? It's also expands the, potential, if you will. So I am interested in that. I think that I just need to see a little bit more of what that looks like. And then, the fact that you say that it's not necessarily going to increase the cost per se as much, right? It's probably limited. Maybe that this is probably something that we just as a council want to push across the board, right? But there's no numbers to this, so that's the only reason why I'm, saying it in very high level. But if you guys understood what I was saying, correct? Like just an ordinance that just covers it, that every development has some aspects of this, right? I think that I'd be open to it. I think that, if it's limited, we can definitely cover this. Now, the larger units, the only thing that I'm concerned about is how do we ensure that it's affordable if it's multifamily folks living in it, and, 3 rooms or more would potentially be more expensive or market rate.
So per affordable housing ordinance, if they do on-site affordable housing, they have to be equal in size. So if they had 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and to comply with the affordable housing ordinance, you would have to have a comparable distribution of those units. So looking at this ordinance, trying to incentivize both on-site affordable compliance and having those larger units, we would have to look at different ways to do both. Or if we decide that the need to have those larger units available in the community is more important, then we would then want to accept the fee revenue and be able to allow them to get a bonus for just having a project that provides predominantly large units to larger households. So it's kind of one of those trade-off issues where we look at, we could require both and just make sure that they have them distributed and we get larger units. They're also affordable. And since the units rent is tied to the income level, then the rent stays affordable. If it's market rate, they charge market prices.
Okay, and then how would we ensure that, let's say, a multifamily or a large family in general do get these homes?
So we can put a minimum occupancy limit. We don't currently have one with the Affordable Housing Ordinance, but if that's something that the council is interested in as we look at revising the Affordable Housing Ordinance in the fall, that would be something that we could look into.
Yeah, and the only reason why I say that is because, I think, with the housing that the county provides, right? So when people say, oh, I have housing, provided by the county, sometimes it's one person. So let's say it's, and I've seen this, I've worked with communities that, need housing from the county where there's 5-6 people, young family, one of the parents may be disabled or something, and they qualify for housing, and they're in a single family home, potentially 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, whatever the case may be. And as the kids age out 18 plus, they're moving out, having their own lives. The 2 seniors are still living in an extremely large home with nobody else, right? And that's kind of one of the parts that it's broken in our housing system at a county level. And so I think I don't want to necessarily apply it to all homes, but just very specific for these particular units that, there's a minimum of 3 people or 4 people or 5 people. I will say that there are people that, I've knocked doors on where they've told me that there's 10 people living here and only 2 breadwinners, right? Because they do have their parents, they have a sibling and their children, divorced families that, can't afford to live on their own, a wide variety of things. So I just want to be able to provide the safety net to ensure that those units go to the targeted communities when we're talking about targeting special needs populations. So not only with seniors, not only with, students, but also some of these larger families. I will say that as an Asian American, our community is well known for multifamily generational households, and about 30% of Hayward is that demographic that does have their elders live with them. So I just want to make sure that we are protecting that unit for that particular cause. So if we can have something like that, I think that's smart. The ADUs, I do just want to say that I think we do have to restrict them for affordable housing. That is not state law right now. There's no guarantee. And let's be honest, the people that can afford an ADU are making a man cave and a, she shed and, for their office space. It's not necessarily for renting it out affordably, right? They either have an elder move in or they use it for an office space. And on average, it's what, from 0 to, having an ADU, it's about $250,000 on average for creation.
I'm not sure the average. I know I've seen them for less.
Okay.
Although restricting the ADUs would require extensive monitoring and staff time, because you would be monitoring individual homeowners with ADUs in their units. So we have to think about that in terms of staff capacity to be able to have restricted ADUs.
Job guarantee, right? So,
more staff guaranteed.
Yeah, sure, right? But the reason why I bring up the ADUs, I would love if ADUs were actually very much restricted to affordability. It's not the case today. So that's the reason why I sometimes get a little uncomfortable around the ADU and affordability conversations. I think the price does go on average up to $250,000 when we're talking about connecting of sewage and water and everything that's included. And again, doing that. So I think ADUs is something we can expand on. I think that if we have something streamlined, I've also suggested to the city in the past, I think, in conversations in the past, that if we have, just to make it a little bit more affordable and potentially, utilizing our land, single family homes especially, is having a 3 or 4 pre-printed blueprints that people can just go, the city accepts, and then they go straight to contracting, rather than creating something where, you know, you've seen it where they come to the planning commission and they have to get thrown, but then also height limits. You know, people in the hills don't necessarily like another ADU that's maybe even 10 inches higher than the average home there. So I think we do need to tackle the height conversation throughout the city, and what's appropriate, as well as, you know, to Mark's point earlier, is just kind of saying, you know, how can we push back on the neighborhoods, you know, being upset about it, right? Because we have to build for the future, not necessarily today or tomorrow. Other than that, I think that if we can have a higher amount for the developers as to what we expect of them, I think the more dense, it's great. I do think that, you know, Ms. Morales, to your point of, you know, how big the rooms are is really, really important, because the rooms are getting tinier and tinier. You can't even fit a bed in there. And you know, I'm looking to increasing our affordable housing aspect, right? Our minimum requirements, both for single family as well as multifamily and rentals and so forth. So this is obviously going to be a longer conversation, but that's kind of what I'd like to see. I do think that if, you know, Director Clausen allows us to, if we can look to see what fees we're going to waive, there are some that are already stated via, you know, the ADU situation, or defer. This is something that I've stated, you know, my first year in council, is even a property tax deferment. I know you guys don't like it, but something that we can say, even like a quarter of it's deferred, or some type of benefit, especially as we are turning into a potentially an economic downturn. How can we still ensure that developers are interested in Hayward, committed to Hayward, and investing in Hayward? And I think it's some of these things that, you know, we're still going to get our money, but maybe it's a little delayed.
Okay.
Other than that, yes. Sorry, and I'll just finish up on the transit piece. Transit, I just feel like the BART project, we had a project in BART. We couldn't touch it because of the state law. But it wasn't dense enough. I think Miss Aguilar actually called in about that, you know, maybe a year or 2 years ago by now. And that was a missed opportunity. So hence why I do want us to project what we want to look at, how we build for the next 25 years to 50 years, not necessarily in the next 2 years where neighbors are comfortable. We kind of have to push the envelope. And then if it's along Mission, we know Mission immediately means a better return on investment for the developer. So if we have projects on Mission, it has to be far more aggressive in what we get from them, because Mission, everyone knows, that's, you know, where, you know, wealthier people decide to buy and purchase, and where a lot of the more expensive developments are happening, while we are protecting our flat land. So I want to be very specific in what our assets are, and making sure that we get the most bang for our buck as we hold them accountable and also work with them. So I think that's did I answer all your questions? I just want to make sure.
Yes, thank you.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. So I will add my appreciation for the really thoughtful engagement on this topic, both between departments as well as throughout the community. I know there's been a number of walkthroughs as part of the bigger project around housing design, et cetera. I want to also acknowledge, I do see that Ms. Aguilar has your hand up. If it's okay with my colleagues, we'll go to you after I do my comments before we go to the next item. I'm seeing nods, so thank you for that. Okay, so in terms of feedback, you know, I hear the question about, do we prioritize populations? Do we prioritize affordability? And I think what I'm hearing, my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of, it's a both and. It is students who are low income. It is seniors who have low income as a priority. And so to the extent that it is possible to do that, that would be my feedback anyway. And then I'm really appreciative of the universal design. And Councilmember Marquez and I have been pushing that since the Planning Commission days. So I'm super excited to see this on on the table. And I appreciate that it be one of the things that is incentivized. I don't think it necessarily has, this one I don't necessarily think has to tie into income. But I will say that it's worth talking with Community Resources for Independent Living in Hayward and Tom Hines from, which you may have already talked to him, from East Bay Innovations about there are funding sources specifically for housing. I believe it's tied to ownership for folks who have disabilities. And so that may help with the financing of a project. And frankly, anybody is one turned ankle away from, or one medical emergency away from needing a unit that doesn't have stairs. So the idea of, and that to me is the design of Universal, is that it really does work for everybody. So I'm excited to see that on the table, looking forward to hearing back from the development community about what makes sense and what doesn't. I know there's some questions about stacked flats, which is kind of where I always go with this, but I know that increases cost to build, et cetera. So, as we look at, so in terms of larger sizes, I do appreciate that that's not as available, and so I'm fine to have that be a priority. I do think that the overcrowding is much more due to cost than unit size availability, but I appreciate that there aren't as many available. So the one ask, and this may have already been done, is it used to be the case that there were a lot of underutilized vouchers and a few underutilized units that were the larger. Now that those weren't necessarily in our community, so just the data check may have already been done. But just ask that be done if it hasn't already. And to Councilmember Wahab's point about making sure that those affordable large units, and this is another one where I would prioritize affordability for the size, that they do go to the large families to the extent that we're able to mandate that. To your point, Ms. Morales, I do like mixed income. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll come back to that. I do like mixed income. I understand there's some challenges with it, but so I am interested in incentivizing that if possible. There was a comment about the mobile home parks, and I think that that's a model that we actually do need to relook at as jurisdictions. The opportunity to actually own a home. I don't think it has to be senior restricted. I think the model actually could be quite good. And of course, prioritizing units that help accomplish our RHNA numbers. So that mod income being targeted. We always talk about ownership, and even incentivizing maybe it's rental for the first 15 to 20 years in terms of a return on investment, and then becomes co-op or some other ownership model. I'd be interested in that as well. In terms of, to me, density bonus is the first incentive, but I understand that there may be some other concessions that kind of facilitate affordability by design or getting the kind of projects that we need in town. So I do appreciate the proposals to incentivize those. We seem to be getting a number of ADU projects, so I don't know that that's a priority for me in terms of incentivizing that. We have talked about the pre-approved designs, as Councilmember brought up, and I'm certainly, if that streamlines development process, all for that. That's a good idea. Not a big fan of land dedication for affordable housing offsite, but perhaps for open space, especially as we're talking about more density. That's interesting. Certainly willing to consider that. Deferring fees rather than waivers whenever possible, but certainly clearly advertising and promoting whatever incentives we're offering. I agree with all of that. I also concur with Councilmember Salinas about increasing heights. I'm certainly ready to go up. And I do understand that, or it's my understanding that if we want to give one story, we may need to give 3. because of the what do you call it? The cost for building. Like, it's a lot more to build 4th story, but not a ton more to build 6. And so I'm not sure if just 1 story may be enough of an incentive, but I defer to the expertise of the developers you'll talk this through with. But I am willing to see that go higher. I think one of the things we've heard from the community, again, to Councilmember Salinas's point, is that stepped height is important. So people aren't necessarily getting a looming thing right next to them. It's 1 story higher right next to existing property, and then can go up from there. View corridors or some other ways to break up the feeling of monolith seems to be important. And sorry, I lost track of my space. Yeah. And then in terms of the trade-offs for those larger units, I concur that it makes sense to protect the bedroom size, but I am open to potentially reducing some of the other space if that gets us where we need to go. And as council members and Selena said, like, open space is important, or co-working spaces. Can there be some good Wi-Fi space within the building as a community room if you're going to reduce the size of the living room? Or maybe there's a shared kitchen for big event cooking. And to that end, council has had a priority around complete communities. So I share my colleagues' hesitation around reducing the amount of commercial space available. But I do think looking at it as commercial space and not necessarily retail, we do hear that, bricks and mortar is not necessarily where people are shopping. As much as our community says they want experiential opportunities, the dollars don't always make that to pencil out. And so if it's childcare, if it's co-working spaces, if it's incubator space, to the extent that we can have complete communities where there is work next to jobs, that's important to me. And I acknowledge that we're hearing less and less office, less and less commercial. So none is not acceptable, but maybe a little less, especially if there's a trade-off for the benefit of the residents. And then always interested in, if there's the parking offset. I know we as a city don't always have control over limiting of parking, but to the extent that there can be car shares or shuttles or things like that, because I think just because there's parking, as we said last night, doesn't mean that people don't have cars and that those cars don't impact already overcrowded areas. So I think that answered the questions. Seeing nods. So at this point, I think I will reopen the public comment section and go to Ms. Aguilar. And are you unmuted, Ro? Oh, now you're muted. Ro, can you unmute yourself?
There we
go. Perfect.
I had a problem with a dead mouse trying to pick raising my hand, so I had to switch to a laptop. Anyway, thank you for including me. I want to focus on the question of targeted versus increase in on-site affordable housing. I think the primary purpose of a density bonus, and I'm saying primary because I think there are other purposes, but the primary purpose, and we have to keep this in mind, is to increase inclusionary on-site affordable housing stock, primarily for lower income owner occupied housing. Now, the reason I am, you all know I'm advocating for this all the time, is because in the long run, and we're seeing the need now, this is the opportunity for home ownership and lower income population. There is a desperate need for this. And if we are here revising our density bonus, our affordable housing ordinance, let's think long-term and where can we do the most, I want to say good, but the most give people the most benefit and most opportunity to home ownership and to gain wealth and enter the middle class, because that is desperately needed now, even for our democracy. And that is inclusionary on-site affordable housing stock. So I applaud the report on density bonus that, we have the carrot. The density bonus is the carrot. We're laying out a buffet of possibilities to our developers. But if the developer still has the option to not build affordable housing and instead pay in lieu fees, there are many instances where the developer will go that route because politically it's easier. And it may even be easier economically, given the price of housing right now. So we need a little stick for the developer to kind of nudge him over to the buffet table of the carrot. And that is requiring a minimum percentage of affordable housing in every development. You don't have a choice. You gotta include affordable housing. This percentage, say 15%, has to be affordable housing. And then the city and the developer can leverage that 15% to go up more, given, if they want to take advantage of more density bonus or concessions or waivers or whatever, or to just stay at the 15%. There's a lot of room for negotiation there. They can partake of the buffet, but getting them to that table is not going to be easy. There are going to be NIMBYs who don't like this. You're at your planning commission. One of the planning commissioners said, this is state control and people are going to be angry. And, you're going to be fighting that no matter what's on the buffet. You may not get the developer to the table. So I think this is so important that we have every development include affordable housing because there's such a great need. And we have to do this by saying, okay, what's coming in. When you come into Hayward, this is what's required, 15% affordable housing, and then you partake of the buffet. And quickly on the density bonus issue, and I think streamlining the process, I think making it consistent, simplified as much as possible, not complicated, consistent with state law. And then you can even go beyond that. If you want to add more density developer, you can get more from Hayward than state law allows. Just give us the dense on-site affordable units. And also we might think about maybe a staff person who becomes an expert in this, or a couple of staff people, you can't just have one in case they're, on vacation.
Okay.
So a couple of staff people who are experts in this, who can assist the developer in this process and make it doable, knowable, streamlined. So those are my comments on this, but you need the little stick, guys. You need that little stick. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so noted. And unless there's anything else on this item, we will move along to our future agenda topics. And are there any comments on that? Yeah, Councilmember Wahab.
Sorry. I did want to ask Ms. Morales, when are we going to visit the actual affordability percentage?
So we have hired a consultant to do the feasibility study, and by the September Taskforce meeting, we should have the preliminary findings of that study. And I did want to note that the September meeting, we're looking at an alternative date for that meeting since it does fall currently within the council recess time. So we'll be reaching out to you for an alternative date for the September meeting.
Okay, and the reason why I ask is because I know this is the one I've been asking for a couple years now, and it looks like Rose also been asking. But I think that that's definitely priority. I know you've been saying, early this fiscal year. So I just wanted to see kind of when that is. And then if we do, provide whatever input we're providing, when would it come to the full council?
So we're probably looking at it going to the full council early next year. So if we have the preliminary findings, we still have to do some community outreach after the preliminary findings, and then make the actual proposal for the amendments to the affordable housing ordinance.
Okay. Which is not great for me. I don't like to hear that, because I think we should do it a lot faster, but I get it. That is a priority for me. I think that out of everything that we've done, that's a priority. And then obviously, changing up this ordinance a little bit. When would this come back to the full council?
We are looking at bringing this back in the fall. I don't have a specific date yet, but we're targeting sometime early in the fall.
Okay. Other than that, I just think that, if we can prioritize these two, I think these are the two big heavy lifts that we have for, when we talk about housing, this is it, right? But I don't feel like there's anything else that I'd add at this moment, except for any continuation of these conversations.
Thank you. There was mention of the feasibility study, I think. Is that
correct? So the feasibility study is scheduled so we have on the September 1st agenda, we have a date to be determined, actually, the affordable housing and ordinance preliminary analysis. So we've requested the feasibility study, which will provide us those preliminary findings.
Oh, okay. And just so I'm saying the words that are tied to the right thing, this is the feasibility study related to building housing and building affordable housing. Is that accurate? Or
you're correct. So the affordable housing ordinance to identify what the feasible percentages are for on-site inclusionary.
Okay, so not the feasibility or because we've talked about having some kind of work session around just the sort of the overall costs of building housing, et cetera.
Correct. And that's not it.
Got it. Okay. Therefore, my confusion. Got it.
However, I will say that in the analysis that they're doing, they are looking at the general feasibility of development and what the costs are. So we will have a lot of information on the cost to build housing based on different prototype models as a result of this analysis.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. That's certainly helpful. Councilmember Salinas, did you have anything on tentative schedule?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. The only other thing I would add to that is sort of a placeholder for agenda setting and kind of review of the task force, probably in the first meeting of 2023, which I think is March usually. Because there will be new committee members, and it'll be a good time to think through the task force, et cetera. Okay. Any other announcements, referrals, anything for the good of the order? Anything from staff or my colleagues? I'm going to take that as a resounding no. And appreciate you all. Thank you so much for all this work. Have a great night.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Great job, Tia. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it, Councilmember Lamnin. Thank you for your help. Have a
Good
good
night,
night,
Rosemary.
everybody.